The last few shiurim, History of Torah, Part 1, Part 2, Part 3, we have gotten all the way from the first interaction between God and humanity with Adam, all the way to Moshe and the Master Revelation. And then last week we talked about how Hashem gave Moshe the Torah and Jewish people the Torah in the desert. It was during two major periods of time, one minor period of time. Nothing happened for 38 years, actually. Harriet, thank you for texting me back. I just want to say that I know that's not your daughter's yahrzeit, but this past Shabbos was supposed to be the Shabbaton for Lili Nishmas, Harriet's daughter. And I just want to say that we were thinking about that this past Shabbos, and we felt the absence of not being in shul even more strongly than we do every week. And Chaval al Da'avdin, as I say, it's a shame that it couldn't happen this year. But I just want to say thank you to Harriet for doing this all every year. It's very meaningful. It's very, very wonderful, very helpful. It brings energy to the Kehillah, the Yasher Koach. On that note, I'll tell Norma that I'm sorry we didn't get to see Rabbi Johnny. That was a lot of fun. But Mir Hashem, we'll do those things hopefully sometime soon, God willing.
Amen.
So perhaps tonight's shir could be Le'ili Nishmasa. Harriet, maybe you could text me what her exact yard is. That would be helpful too. And just a number of you are chatting to me that you are thinking the same thing this past Shabbos. So Harriet, I want you to know that your Kehillah family, you're very much on everyone's mind this past Shabbos. I know how much you like being the center of attention, so I won't continue with that. Okay. All right, so let's take a look at the next section of the shir, which has to do with Sefer Devarim. Now, Jerry, 2 weeks ago, Jerry asked me about Sefer Devarim. Jerry, do you remember the question that you asked me?
It's a long time ago, Rabbi.
Maybe even 3 weeks ago.
Yes, I asked you about if the written Torah was given in detail just before Moshe, at the end of the 48 years, why did we need the Mishnah? Because the Mishnah is there to clarify really the oral the oral Torah. Is that right? I think that's what I said.
Actually, you did ask that last week, but 2 weeks ago you asked me a different question, which in a way is a stronger question. And because 2 weeks ago you asked me about the voice, the language that's used in the Torah. Do you remember your question?
Yes. That Moshe, if I'm not mistaken, is the only one that speaks to God. He speaks directly to God, and also that there's the first person, I, and everyone else. He said to somebody. Moshe is the only one that is written in the Torah as I.
That's correct. And in fact, I would add to what you're saying, which is that if you look so let's talk about Moshe's role for a minute, okay? If you read Sefer Devarim, the 5th book of the Torah, Deuteronomy, if I'm not mistaken, speaking of my favorite English words, Joel, last week we mentioned my favorite everyone in the shul knows. Right? What's my favorite English word? Joel?
Ecclesiastes.
Ecclesiastes, very good. Probably not English, by the way. It's probably Greek.
Rhymes with phylacteries.
I think it's Ray Kaplan's favorite. Anyway, so last week we mentioned another word that is one of my favorite words. But actually, one of my favorite words comes from Tom Sawyer, Huck Finn, Mark Twain, which Huck Finn makes reference to the old Deuteronomy himself, which is kind of funny because obviously Deuteronomy is not a person. Actually, it might have been Leviticus. I can't remember which one it is. I haven't done a review of Huck Finn in a long time, but I read it many times years ago.
Rabbi, have you ever seen the play Cats?
No, I have not seen the play Cats.
One of the oldest cats is named Deuteronomy.
Oh, okay. All right. Thanks for letting me know. I want to welcome Barry Steiner. I know he also loves attention. So, special here tonight. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining us, Barry. Very nice to see you. Okay, so we're up to the history of Torah part 4, in which we talk about Moshe Rabbeinu and the role that he plays, and the differences between the first 4 books of Torah versus the book of the Torah. I'm going to move everybody just for the sake of some of us appreciate it. If you need to talk, you're welcome to do so. Ask any questions. All you have to do is hit the space bar, and you're welcome to ask anything you like. I have a very verbal baby in the background. No. He's as long as people don't complain, he's fine. Okay. I shouldn't say he's verbal. He's very vocal, super vocal baby. Okay. Did you hear that? Okay. He's super vocal and he's very high pitched. You know the piano, when you go to the right, it gets higher and higher. Well, he's off the piano somewhere. Okay, he's got like the other octave, the Mashiach octave. Okay, so you plug my computer, I'm disrupt that. Okay. So throughout the Torah, or throughout the first 4 books of the Torah, what does Hashem do? And what does Moshe do? He says, "Vayidaber Hashem Moshe Lemar." He's narrating exactly the way Hashem tells him to write it. Thank you. But what does he do here in the 5th book of the Torah in Sefer Devarim? Here Moshe writes in the first person, as if he's writing his own personal account. So in this respect, the style of Devarim is much more similar. Talk about an academic approach here. And from this perspective, the style of writing of the writing of Sefer Devarim, the 5th book of the Torah, Deuteronomy, is much more similar in many ways to the books of the Nevi'im, to the books of the prophets. It's almost like he's writing his own personal account. It's very, very different from the first 4 books. Nevertheless, we know there are many, many mitzvot that are taught in Devarim exclusively. And in other words, even though Sefer Devarim is called Mishneh Torah, which means it's a repetition, a lot of the mitzvot are repeated. So it's like they're about to enter the land. It's the last 30 days of Moshe's life that he's teaching it to them. And right after he dies, Yoshua is going to cross them over the Jordan and go into the land of Israel. So Moshe Rabbeinu is reminding them about many of the mitzvot that he'd already taught, but he in fact teaches many mitzvot that are not yet taught, have not yet been taught. And clearly Sefer Devarim is one of the 5 books of Moses. It's one of the 5 books of, actually, the 5 books of Moses might be the worst title for a book in the history of humanity, right? It's the 5 books of God, or the 4 books of God and 1 book of Moses. I mean, that sounds like fear, that sounds like heresy. Clearly the 5th book of Torah is written very differently than the first 4 books, but the bottom line is that it is part of the Torah. Clearly it's considered part of the Torah. We don't differentiate between the mitzvot found in the first 4 books and then the mitzvot found in the 5th book. There's not going to be any difference between them. There's no difference halakhically between a mitzvah found in Sefer Vayikra or Bamidbar or a mitzvah found in Sefer Devarim. There's not going to be any difference at all. So why is the format different? And the answer has to do with the medium through which it was revealed. In the other sections of the Torah, in the 4 books, first 4 books, Hashem spoke directly to the people through Moshe's mouth. The book of Devarim, however, was revealed to Moshe through, the English translation is divine inspiration. The Hebrew might be Ruach HaKodesh. He then repeated the words himself to the people. In the Zohar, it says, Hai de'ikri Mishneh Torah, Moshe mepi atmo amaran. That which is called Mishneh Torah, meaning the book of Devarim, was spoken by Moshe himself. And the Gemara tells us, with the commentary of Tosafot, that Devarim was said, Moshe me atmo amram, that Moshe spoke the words of Devarim himself, however, Baruch HaKodesh, through divine inspiration. So, in the first 4 books of the Torah, Hashem is speaking through Moshe's mouth. In the Ol Moed, God's voice emanated from above the ark, we talked about last week. But in Sefer Devarim, there's already a change. And Moshe, although Hashem first spoke to Moshe through prophecy, and then Moshe related the words to the people in his own voice. It's very important difference. In the first 4 books, Hashem is speaking through Moshe. The language is Shechina medaberes mitoch grona. I'll tell you a story that some of you are not going to like. Okay? You're not going to like it because in West Akila we do things differently. But I have an uncle and an aunt. He's a world-class Talmud Chacham. And in a way, I consider her the bikeach of the family, which means if I want advice, I go to her. I go to his wife, to my aunt, okay? And I once said to my uncle, I said, it seems, it's not fair. I was much younger. I said, but like Tante Leah, she has so much to say, so much to share. Like, she doesn't really, she never speaks in public at events that were mixed, even at Sheva Brachas for the family. Okay, that's how it's done in their circles. We have to respect their culture. Obviously, in West Wakila, we do things differently. So my uncle very smartly says, he goes, don't worry, when I speak, it's Shechina medaberes mitoch grono. He goes, it's like God speaking and the Shechina comes out of Moshe's mouth. When I speak, really, it's Tante Leah speaking. I just want to say the words. I don't know. I always found that very comforting in a way, And the truth is, those of you that know me and Shandy, whenever I speak, you could be sure that if I did discuss it with Shandy, and I usually do, not a shir like this, but a Shabbos drasha, whatever. Certainly, bigger speeches. Her influence. Those of you that know her well can see her influence in my drashas pretty easily, especially if you read between the lines. Okay, so what I did say, what I didn't say. Usually, she's very smart about telling me to leave things out. I'm sure everyone is grateful for that. Okay, so the book of Devarim is different. That in the first 4 books, when Hashem speaks through Moshe Rabbeinu, but in the 5th book, Moshe Rabbeinu experiences a prophecy of sorts, and then Moshe relates the words to the people in his own voice. So the Vilna Gaon, in his introduction to Devarim, explains as follows. The first 4 books were taught to the people directly from HaKadosh Baruch Hu through the mouth of Moshe. And that's the special level of prophecy to which only Moshe was privileged. We know that one of the 13 Ikarei HaEmunah, one of the 13 principles of faith, is that Moshe Rabbeinu has the highest level of nevuah. No other prophet comes close to his level of prophecy. He is the Av HaNeviim, the father of the prophets. Says the Vilna Gaon, that special level of prophecy to which only Moshe was privileged, that's what our sages describe as Shechina medaberes mitoch grono, God speaking through his throat. However, says the Gaon, the prophecy of the book of Devarim was different. It was taught to the nation of Israel in the same manner as the prophecies of the other prophets, Isaiah, Ezekiel, Jeremiah, etc. God related what he was to teach, and the next day Moshe would go and relate it to the people. And when he taught his prophecy, therefore, he was disconnected from the divine voice, and he spoke with his own voice. So now we start to see a little bit about why Moshe Rabbeinu speaks in a different tone, or not just a different tone, but in a different person than he does in the first 4. In the first 4 books, it says, Hashem spoke to Moshe saying, because that's Moshe, not just Hashem dictating, it's Hashem speaking through Moshe. But in the 5th book, that prophecy took place the day before, and here Moshe says, Hashem told me to tell you. It's very, very different language. He speaks with his own voice. You might be familiar that when it comes to prophecy, there's all kinds of different levels of prophecy. We're going to talk about it a little bit when we get to the prophets, hopefully before the end of class today. But there's different levels of prophecy. The level of revelation in the book of Devarim involved Moshe more so than the other 4 books. But it does not mean that Devarim is on the same level as Malachim or Yirmiyahu or Yeshaya. Devarim certainly is the 5th book of the Torah. The Chumash itself testifies about Moshe, that Lo kam navi od b'Yisrael ke Moshe, asher yado Hashem panim al panim. Never again has there arisen in Israel a prophet like Moshe, who God had known face to face. So here's the key sentence. The method of relaying the book of Devarim was more similar to that of the prophets. Nevertheless, it's still a record of direct communication between Hashem and Moshe. And in that sense, it is just like the rest of the Torah and fundamentally different from the writings of the prophets. I'll say the sentence one more time because it's very, very important. Although we said that in some ways Devarim is similar to the other prophets and not like the rest of the Torah, and it's different than the rest of the Torah because not Hashem speaking through Moshe's voice. Hashem gave prophecy to Moshe one day, and the next day Moshe goes and teaches it to the people, but speaking in his own voice. The only difference between the first 4 books and the 5th book is in the relaying of the prophecy. The method of relaying the book of Devarim is more similar to that of the other prophets. Nevertheless, it's a direct communication between God and Moshe. It's a record of direct communication between God and Moshe. And in that sense, it's just like the rest of the Torah, fundamentally different from the writings of the prophets. And only Moshe, on his lofty level, because he's the Av HaNeviim, the father of all the prophets, only Moshe, who is the highest, at the highest level of Nevi'im, of prophets, is capable of receiving Torah, unlike all the other prophets who are incapable of it. The other prophets, when they teach, it doesn't have the same level of stringency, the same level of seriousness, the same level of for our religion, for Judaism, as does Moshe Rabbeinu's prophecy. Well, hopefully we'll get to a class just about the prophets themselves. It's not for right now. Now, this is all good and well until what? This is all good and well until which part of the Torah? The last 8 psukim. The last 8 verses of the Torah. Anybody remember, what do the last 8 verses of the Torah talk about? Rifki sitting across from me, she says.
Moses' death.
Very good. Moshe Rabbeinu's death is correct. The entire Torah is revealed to Moshe in various stages. However, when you reach the end of the Torah, you're into a problem. 8 verses before the end, it says that Moshe died. It is not possible that he would have written this when it was not yet true. So who wrote the last 8 verses? That's the question.
Joshua?
That's according to one opinion. Very good. Either Joshua wrote the last 8 verses, or Moshe. And the Talmud, the Gemara in Bava Basra on Daf Tes Vav Amud Aleph 15a, speaks about different opinions as to who wrote the last few verses. So the Gemara says, Vayamas Sham Moshe Eved Hashem. That's Deuteronomy chapter 34, verse 5. And Moshe, who was a servant of God, died. Asks the Gemara, Evsher Moshe Chai v'Kasav Vayamas Sham Moshe. Could it be that Moshe is still alive and he wrote and Moshe died? Ella Ad Kan Kasav Moshe. Until the last, the 8 psukim, Moshe Rabbeinu was the one who wrote it. Mikan ve'elech Kasav Yoshua, like Zach said. However, according to Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, or some say Rabbi Nechemiah's opinion, the last 8 verses were written by Yehoshua. So Rabbi Shimon says to Rabbi Yehoshua, Efsher Sefer Torah Chaser Ot Achat. Can it be possible that Moshe left the scroll of the Torah missing even one letter? It says in Deuteronomy chapter 31, Lakuach et Sefer Torah Hazeh, take this book of the Torah. In other words, Moshe Rabbeinu himself planned on writing the entirety of the Torah. Therefore, Ela Adkan HaKadosh Baruch Hu Omer v'Moshe Omer v'Kosev. Says Rabbi Shimon, a very, very moving passage here from Rabbi Shimon. It'd be interesting if this was Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who was the author of this teaching. His yahrzeit is tonight. We won't mention what night of the Omer it is. Okay, not now. Later on, count the Omer. What does he say? Ad kan HaKadosh Baruch Hu Omer u'Moshe Omer v'Kosev. Until now, Hashem tells him. Until now, what happens? Hashem does what? Hashem Omer, Hashem dictates. Moshe Omer, then Moshe repeats. V'Kosev, then he writes it. Mikan ve'elech, but from here on, HaKadosh Baruch Hu Omer, Hashem just told him the words, V'Moshe Kosev b'dema. And Moshe wrote the words with tears. But what did Moshe Rabbeinu not do? For the last 8 verses, he did not repeat what God had dictated. Because from this point on, where it talks about Moshe Rabbeinu's death, Moshe Rabbeinu is crying. And he just writes down what Hashem tells him to write. What does it mean that Moshe wrote with tears? What does it mean that Moshe Rabbeinu wrote with tears? Does that mean that his quill now had tears in it instead of ink? It's not likely. It's like, remember when we finished the Meyer Sefer Torah, right? The Sofer writes the outline of the letter and you fill it in. What does it mean what does this expression mean? That Moshe wrote the last 8 verses with tears instead of ink. So there's a few different opinions. This is Rabbeinu Yom Tov Asavili, Chidushi HaRitzvah. He was a Rishon. I didn't look up to exactly when he lived, probably during the 1300s or so. The Ritva writes that some say, one version of the text is that God dictated and Moshe wrote. From here on, God dictated and Moshe wrote with tears. That is, the difference is that Moshe wrote with ink up until this point, and he wrote the final verses with tears. That is one possibility. It's possible. A second possibility is, that fits the text a little bit better, that till now God dictated, Moshe repeated the words and wrote them. This means that he repeated each verse before writing it, because he was so fond of it and to avoid making any mistakes. If I'm not mistaken, a sofer, when he's copying from a Sefer Torah, which by the way, that's what he has to do. He has to have one Sefer Torah up on top, one Sefer Torah at the bottom, and he copies word for word. But he also says it when he copies it. He also says the word. He articulates the word. So according to this opinion, that Moshe was so fond of it, so fond of the psukim, so to avoid erring, to avoid making any sorts of mistakes. So what did Moshe do? He actually repeated what Hashem dictated. But from here on, Hashem dictated and Moshe wrote with tears, meaning that he cried while he wrote. And out of anguish, he did not repeat the verses. So here we have different opinions in the Rishon and the early commentators to explain what the Gemara means, or what Rabbi Shimon means when he says that the Torah was written with tears, the last 8 verses. However, the questions are pretty obvious, which is that both of the opinions in the Talmud are not satisfactory. The Vilna Gaon raises this point. The Talmud itself states that if Yeshua wrote these verses, it contradicts the principle that Moshe wrote the whole Torah. On the other hand, it's difficult to say that Moshe wrote these verses himself. How could he write that he died when he's still alive? And these explanations to say that he wrote with tears don't really answer those questions. So how is Rabbi Shimon dealing with the question the Gemara is asking? Because even if you go with these explanations, it's still not satisfactory. So according to the Vilna Gaon and his brilliance, listen to his brilliant explanation. The Vilna Gaon explains that, I'll summarize it for you and then I'll share it with you more like word by word, that Moshe, first he says actually both opinions are right. Moshe Rabbeinu did write the last 8 psukim, and he did write them bidema. But dema doesn't mean he wrote them with tears. Let's see what it means. Normally demaot are tears. That's what the word dema means, tear. But let's see what it actually means. Says the Vilna Gaon, we can explain that both opinions, elu ve'elu divrei Elokim chayim, which means that both opinions are correct. And they're looking at it from different perspectives. So each opinion explains one aspect of what happened, and they don't contradict each other. The meaning of the word dema, earlier we translated it as tears, means it's based on its appearance in the verse. The verse is in Shemot 22:28, when it refers to dimacha, your ripened produce and mixed produce, demacha. And in this case, it means a jumble of letters. So the word dema comes from the root mixed up, as in mixed. And in this case, it means a jumble of letters. So Moshe wrote the final verses with all the words joined together so that they portrayed various forms of God's names. It could not be read as, and Moshe died there, but rather as different words according to Torah mysticism. What is he talking about? Do you remember how, by the way, I think if I'm not mistaken, last Shavuos, we talked about this Vilna Gaon, but that was probably at 1 o'clock in the morning. We quoted this idea then. Do you remember how I talked to you about, if you can have that? Okay. What am I holding in front of me? It's an index card, right? It says Happy Mother's Day or something like that on it, okay? What is it? It's a rectangle. What is it? What is it now? Almost? Almost, not quite a square, but let's call it a square. Okay? And what is it now? Triangle. Well, what is it? Is it a triangle? Is it a square? Is it a rectangle? The answer is, or is it an index card? The answer is, it's an index card. But it depends on your perspective and what you're addressing. That's what we spoke about what the Torah is as being Right. Rishki says it was better when I used the rubber band as an example. Okay. We talked about that in terms of the whole Torah itself being, is it God's name, 600,000 letters? Is it a blueprint of creation? Is it an instruction manual? Talked about that a few weeks ago. Says the Vilna Gaon, what were the last 8 verses? They were written in such a way that they could not be read in the way that we read them. But rather, they were different words, according to Torah mysticism, that represented different aspects of God. So Moshe was not crying. He did not write Vayamas Shem Moshe, Moshe died there. It's not what he wrote. Rather, he wrote those letters and they meant something different. And Dema means to be mixed up. After Moshe, and that's what Rabbi Shimon meant. After Moshe's death, Yeshua wrote those letters again in the manner that he was permitted. And as such, the two opinions don't contradict each other. For in truth, Moshe did write these words, did not leave the Torah lacking even one letter. But Moshe obviously couldn't write the last 8 verses. He couldn't in the way that we have them because he couldn't say that he died. So he wrote them according to their mystical connotation. This is what Dema means, mixed. Moshe wrote them in their hidden form, in terms of what their meaning is. He wrote it in an explicit way, but in terms of the hidden meaning of it. And Yeshua wrote the words in their revealed form, as Rabbi Yochanan stated. Both explanations complement one another. In reality, the last 8 verses are written by Moshe and Yehoshua. Moshe wrote them in their mystical context, and Yehoshua wrote them in the revealed form as it's written for generations. There's a Rebbe in Ner Yisrael. His name is Reb Nachum Lansky. He's known for being a genius. He's known that originally he came from Memphis, Tennessee. And the first time he showed up to Shir, the legend is he showed up wearing jeans, or back then they called them dungarees, and a plaid shirt and a cowboy hat. And today he says one of the top shiurim in the yeshiva. And he's a brilliant man. His son-in-law is Rabbi Daniel Danishevsky. You might know who that is. He lives here in Pico. He's the Rosh Chabura, Rosh Kollel for Rabbi Graydon's Kollel. And his wife teaches in Beis Yaakov. And Rivki says she's a genius. She's a Lansky. No relation, as far as I know, to the gangster. Okay. No, what was his name? I forgot his first name. I'm sure Jill will tell me. Okay. But Rav Nachum Lansky is known in yeshiva for, let's just say, exploring the world of Kabbalah, of mysticism. Considering which night of the Omer tonight is, we feel comfortable sharing a little bit of mysticism. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the night that he died, or the day that he died, Rivki tells me, legend has it, that Hashem kept the sun up longer that day to allow him more time. He taught his Talmidim his teachings, which later was codified as the Zohar. Okay, according to one opinion. So Nachum Lansky, he has a practice of teaching a Mishnah, al pi sod. So we read a Mishnah. The Mishnah teaches, for example, the Mishnah teaches that from what time are you allowed to say Kriya Shema? The time the Kohanim go in to eat their truma, that's the first Mishnah in Brachos, etc. And he will give you the mystical meaning of those words, which I could never give you. It's not my, at the very least, not my cup of tea, but certainly way beyond my ability. So he's reading the same words that I'm reading, but he's reading them according to their mystic meaning. So that's an idea. For me, that's a metaphor of what the Gaon means. That Moshe Rabbeinu wrote it according to their mystical meaning, but it does not mean what it means in the literal meaning, and Yeshua rewrote it with the literal meaning. We certainly believe that the Torah itself it can be read at different levels. We're familiar with the concept of pardes. Pardes means, Jerry, what does pardes mean in modern Hebrew? Pardes. It's an orchard, right? An orchard. So pardes stands for pshat, pay. So I do that, pay. Pardes. Reish, which is remez. Pshat, remez. Pshat is simple meaning. Remez is like the hinted at things, such as gematrias and things of that nature. Dalet is drush, which is homiletic interpretations. And then samach is like the midrashim and some of the gemaras. And then samach is sod, which is the Kabbalistic interpretations of the Torah. So that's pardes. Pshat, remez, drush. We know that every pasuk in Chumash can be read that way. But according to what the Vilna Gaon is teaching is that the last 8 psukim of the Torah, the way that they were written by both Moshe Rabbeinu wrote it one way, and then Yeshua wrote it a different way. So here we have, with this we conclude, in a sense, the history of the written Torah, the 5 books. What I said tonight, by the way, I think I'm going to come back to. You know how I repeat the jokes that I think are funny that no one else thinks are funny? You guys all know that, of course. If you nod your head, it might be disrespectful. I'm just kidding. Okay, but you know how there's certain things that I like to say. They're like, "Oh, Rabbi, you always say that." Yeah. Guess what? I came up with a new line tonight. They're not the 5 books of Moses. They're either 4 books of God and 1 of Moshe, which we said it's not really true. They're the 5 books of Hashem. 5 books of Moses, it might be clear to say that. I don't know. Maybe it's heresy to say that. Why are the 5 books of Moses? They're the 5 books of the Torah. Okay. What do you guys think about that? You can tell me later. All right. We're moving on to Nevi'im, to the prophets. Okay. We're moving on to the Nevi'im. Short or long? Rifki would like to share a comment. No? Oh, okay. Rifki would not like to share a comment. Okay. She would like to, just later on. Okay. So we're going to move on to the prophets. We have the 5 books of the Torah. You see how I said that? The 5 books of the Torah. 5 books of Hashem. And then we have Nach. Nach stands for Nevi'im Ketuvim. That's Tanakh. Torah, Nevi'im, Ketuvim. Nach is, Nevi'im is the prophets. Ketuvim are the writings. So you probably wondered, like, what's the difference between the Torah, the Nevi'im, the Ketuvim? Are there any mitzvot found in the words of the prophets? Are there any, is a level of sanctity, of holiness of the Torah and Nevi'im and Ketuvim, are they all the same? Let me give you some halachic minusha, if you will. You have a siddur. Let's forget you have a siddur. You have a Torah. You have a chumash vayikra. You have a chumash, and then you also have a Megillat Esther. And you need to stack one on top of the other. Which one goes on top? The chumash goes on top. Why? The chumash is the words of God, and the Navi is the words of the Navi. Now it's inspired by God, but we'll see that Nevi'im are at a different level than the Torah itself. What happens if you have by the way, I use the word Megillah, I use Megillah Esther, I should have used Malachim or Shoftim, Yoshua. What happens if you have a book of Yoshua, a book of Joshua, and a book on Tehillim? Which one goes on top? So one is from Nevi'im, one is from Ketuvim. And so the Navi goes on top of the Ketuvim. It's at a higher level, but we'll see. The Gemara tells us something very, very interesting, which is that there were many, many prophets. If you look at Mesilas Yesharim, those of you that have studied Mesilas Yesharim, Path of the Just, that's based on a Braita of Pinchas ben Yair, where he says all the things that a person needs to do in order to attain the level of prophecy. If you ever study the Rambam's Hilchos Yisodi HaTorah, the foundations of Torah, in which he discusses what does a person need to do to become a Navi? A person has to be, have a certain kinds of midos, certain characteristics or personality traits. A person has to be a person who is in charge of the Yetzer Hara, not too physical, etc., etc. There's a litany of spiritual qualities that a person needs to be a prophet. So you might ask, well, how many prophets were there? How many prophetesses were there? Well, there are 7 famous prophetesses, right? Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel and Leah, Abigail, Esther, Huldah. Okay, there are 7 famous women who were Nevi'im, and but besides the famous ones, those are the ones that we know about that are written in the Torah or Tanakh itself. But there were actually many prophets arose, people that reached a high level of purity and character refinement that they could commune with God. And by the way, their communion with God was not at the same level of Moshe. In what way was it different? Because Moshe spoke to God whenever he wanted. They had to ready themselves, prepare themselves, and only if God was in the mood, quote unquote, Kaviyachol, speak with them what he speaks to them. Although there were thousands of these people, only a few of these communications with the Creator are recorded in Nach. Which ones? The Gemara tells us in Megillah, it's Daf Yud Daled and Aleph 14a. Harbe Nevi'im Amdu Lam Yisrael, Kiflayim Kiyos Mitzrayim. There were hundreds of thousands of Jews who became prophets. However, Nevuah Shehuvtchecha Ledoros Nechteva, Shelo Huvtchecha Lo Nechteva. whichever prophecy was necessary for generations was written and canonized as part of Tanakh, and those that were not necessary were not. So the difference between Torah and Tanakh is not just in the quality of the prophecy. There's a fundamental distinction in the very purpose of these works. The word Torah comes from the word Torah, meaning instruction. The Torah is a work of law, a guide for life. The main purpose of Nach, of the Nevi'im, the prophets, is to inspire tshuva, to teach us the Jewish perspective on history, and perhaps even to guide us in the correct philosophic outlook in terms of, leading our life. So I want to share one quote with you from Rav Shamshon Raphael Hirsch about Nach, and then we'll stop for tonight and we'll continue next week. Tanakh should be studied. This comes from Rav Hirsch in the 19 Letters. It's translated by Jacob Breuer. Tanakh should be studied as a foundation of a new science. Nature should be contemplated with the spirit of David. History should be perceived with the ear of an Isaiah. And then, with the eye thus aroused, with the ear thus opened, the doctrine of God, world, man, Israel, and Torah should be drawn from the Bible. It should become a system of ideas fully comprehended. The books of Tanakh should become the source of instructions for life. And people should learn to hear their message throughout their lives. Their eyes should be open to seeing the world surrounding them as God's world, and themselves as God's servants in his world. Their ears should be open to perceive history as a process of educating all mankind toward service of God. To tell you that I have any idea what he's talking about, I'll tell you I have an idea, but I don't know Tanakh well enough to say, oh, he means this or he means that. But the last sentence, though, makes the most sense to me, in my limited understanding of Tanakh, where he says that our ears should be open to perceive history as a process of educating all mankind toward service of God. Because if you look at Tanakh, isn't that what Tanakh really is? If you look at Tanakh, if you look at the Nevi'im, you look at the Ketuvim, isn't that really what it is? It's teaching the Jewish people how to be. So I have some questions here which I did not see earlier. Do we derive halakhah from the other prophets? Yes and no, but the halakhah is going to be at a different level than, I'm looking at the person that asked the question that he has no idea. But we'll see next week, God willing, that it's at a different level of importance or stringency. We don't know what the hidden words were that Moshe Rabbeinu wrote, and Lansky's first name was Meyer. Okay.
Rabbi.
Yes.
Why? The question is, I'm very confused with the last 8 psukim. Why was it necessary for it to be written in a Kabbalistic kind of way? Why all of a sudden that is it done that way? If those 8 psukim, I'm just thinking aloud here, if they were written in the future tense and not in the past tense, it would be almost like God is speaking through Moshe, saying what is going to happen to him, and that's why he's in tears.
Yeah, and that would have been a lot easier, right? But in the fact that when we have it written, it's written in the past tense.
It is, yeah.
Moshe died there, or in the present tense at least, speaking about his death. So the Gemara's assumption is that Moshe would not or cannot write something not true. And therefore the Gemara is seeking to understand what is, how could Moshe have written that? So, okay, the first opinion says he didn't write it. Second opinion says, no, he did write it, but he wrote it in such a way that is, wrote it with his tears. So what the Vilna Gaon is doing is saying they're both correct. Moshe Rabbeinu didn't write the Torah that we have, those last 8 psukim. He wrote it on a mystical level. And that's what Dema means. That's what the Vilna Gaon says. Because he could, and that answers the Gemara's question of how could we have a Torah that Moshe Rabbeinu didn't write? The answer is no, he wrote the whole thing. And he didn't write a falsehood because he wrote it at a different level, which is he didn't write the words and Moshe died. Comes along Yehoshua and he writes the last 8 verses of Psukim. So someone were talking, did Moshe write the whole Torah that we have? The answer is no. Because he didn't write the last 8 verses that we have. But he did write 8 verses, which we don't have, which we have a different version of that was written by Yoshua.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you.
That's what I'm going to say. Okay. All right, everybody. I want to wish you all a good night.
Thank you, Rabbi.
I'm not sure about tomorrow night yet. I'm not sure if there's a share tomorrow night yet or not. We'll let you know through the Kehillah. I may speak about. I'll probably have a shorter share, but let's see what's going on. Okay.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Okay.
Thank you.
Have a good
Thank you.
night. Wonderful. To
Thank
see
you.